Okay, we're now up to operating temperature, and you can see the engine is revving pretty high. With no throttle, the throttle cable is disconnected. We're now at coolant temperature at 90 degrees Celsius. Engine speed at, holy smokes, 1800 RPM. And throttle position still at 12%. And I cannot close the throttle any more than that. Okay, throttle position 11%, 12%. So something is not right here. It's getting extra air somewhere. Okay, I want to show you the IAC valve. That is the intake air control valve for a 2000 Toyota Celica GTS. All right. This idle air control valve has 1, 2, 3 bolts that look like this. The bolts are 0.8 thread pitch M5, 0.8 millimeter thread pitch M5 metric bolts. You can also see that I am missing one bolt. That is not good. And this is the gasket that goes in it. So from what I can see, the IAC valve is this little motor here. Probably, I'm going to guess, a linear solenoid or maybe a stepper motor. And is powered by 3 electrical connectors by duty cycle, pulse width duty cycle. And I believe what it does is it turns some pins like this, and opens and closes a opening that allows air from one side of the throttle to the other side, allows the computer to control the idle. Now these 2 ports here, you can see I got some gunk here, and that junk, I believe, is someone, that is coolant, and that gunk in there, I believe, is someone used coolant pellets to try to stop some kind of a coolant leak. So you have coolant, hot coolant coming in here and warming up the throttle body area. Okay, and the reason why there's hot coolant there is so the IAC comes, bolts to the bottom of the throttle body. You see the throttle body. The IAC valve bolts here, and the coolant runs here to warm up the throttle body area. The reason why it needs to stay warm is because on one side of the throttle is high pressure, and the other side of the throttle is low pressure. And what happens when a gas goes from high pressure to low pressure? It gets cold. And it's kind of how AC works. You know, when your refrigerant gases go from high pressure to low pressure or evaporates, it gets cold, right? And so you don't want the throttle body to freeze. So Toyota has run a couple of coolant lines here to heat up the throttle area to prevent it from freezing. Okay, and there's your throttle valve. You can see the IAC. Okay, lets air in from one side to the other to control the idle. All right. So once again, the IAC valve. Okay, the problem with this car is that when the car is warm, it's idling at 1800 RPM. And after some internet research, I believe that the throttle valve pintle is seized. Right? You can see how dark and carbony it is. And what's weird is, I found this really strange. There's 2 bolts there. Those are not Torx bolts. They are 5. A Torx is a 6-sided bolt. That is a 5-sided fastener. So I'm going to have to buy a special tool for that, I guess. I don't think that this is a serviceable item. You're not really supposed to separate these two. But why not? I'm going to try it. Okay. So anyways, throttle body. So here's the Celica 2000 Toyota Celica GTS, right? There's the throttle body, goes on like that. Easy to take off, 12mm bolts. And you can see I open up the whole area. I already checked for a vacuum leak. You know, I did my internet research. I should mention that I'm actually a licensed professional mechanic. I worked at a GM dealer as an apprentice, and then I worked there as a mechanic. And the internet says to use propane to check for a vacuum leak. I've never seen that before because we don't usually have propane bottles in this shop. But I thought I'll try it. So here's a little contraption I made. All right. It's just a 1/8 tube with some silicone RTB sealer and a tube here, and then hose clamp there. And the propane can go through here and through the tube. And I can use the other end of this tube, okay, to check for vacuuming. Now I put this actually in the throttle intake, and it really does not do enough to increase RPM or decrease RPM. I'm not seeing a difference. So I don't know what the internet's doing. I have a feeling that people who make these kind of internet videos on YouTube, they're just kind of repeating what everyone else does. I don't know if I've never seen this in the shop, and I was actually one of the drivability guys. Okay, so what I have seen in the shop and what I always do, okay, is have a bottle of air intake cleaner here, carb cleaner, right? Hose, and this is just some 1/8 clear plastic hosing, and I just use some silicone RTB sealer again just to seal it, okay, and right at the end here. So when I spray it, okay, it sprays some carb cleaner, and what that does, it tends to choke the engine. So if the engine sucks it in even a little bit, it really does a good job of choking it. Even though it says that it's flammable, but it tends to kill the engine off. Anyways, so that's what I used, and I like it in a clear, flexible hose because I could really, I could check the fuel injectors, okay, check around the intake manifold, okay, I could check the coolant hoses. I could check the vacuum hoses, going to the brake booster. And you can see here that I actually blocked off. Okay, you can see here that I actually blocked off a few lines here. And I blocked off a line here too. And just to see if it made any difference. I kind of knew I wouldn't find a vacuum leak, but I thought I would check it because it's pretty easy to do. Okay, so when you take the throttle body out, you can see the two lines here. Okay, these two are actually coolant lines. Okay. And they go to the bottom of the IAC valve. The IAC valve just happens to serve the function of warming up the throttle body, but it doesn't regulate the coolant flow at all. Okay, just to heat up the bottom there. Okay, so that's where I am right now, diagnosing a high idle problem that happens all the time. It is not intermittent, and I pretty much eliminated everything except probably the IAC valve. Yeah. Okay. So I saw a video on YouTube, which I will link in the description, of someone testing out a Toyota IAC valve, and they cycled the ignition on and off, and it moved. And so I'm going to try to repeat that experiment here. Now, since I'm by myself, I can't really get in there and cycle the ignition. But what I have is the ignition in the car is set to run, and I have the battery hooked up to jumper cables. So when I connect this cable, okay, when I touch this cable here, it's going to turn the ignition on. So let me zoom in here. Okay, let me zoom in here and see. And the IAC valve is plugged. Okay, the IAC valve is plugged in. Okay, let's zoom in here and see if we can detect any kind of movement. And I can see the IAC valve looks very gummed up. Okay, now I'm going to touch it. Where is it? Okay. Okay, now I'm going to touch it just like that. All right. Let's do this a couple times. I'm not seeing any movement. One more time. Okay, let's do it again. And this time, let's kind of leave it there. One more time. Let's leave it there. And I see no movement whatsoever in the IAC valve. So I think logically, before I go and replace that valve, check the wiring. Oops. Check the wiring. Trace it all the way back. And I could also check the continuity between here, between the harness here, and somewhere in the ECU is where the wires go. So I can check that, but I'm not going to right now. Okay. Okay, so I have now purchased the 5-sided tool. Kind of looks like a Torx, but they only have 5 sides in order to remove that bolt there. I'm going to use 2 hands to do it. Excuse me for a minute. Okay, you see the bolts are out. Now let's take a close look at this thing. Alright, so let's see if we can pull the IAC motor out of the housing. Real careful. Interesting. Hard to see in it. Interesting design. Never quite seen anything like it. Pretty complicated. Here's the other side of it. See a bearing there. Pretty complex design. Too complicated. I don't like it. Okay, this is a little tight. Okay, but it's a little tight. I can move it. Let's see if we can get a shot of this. Really hard to see. You see it moving there? So let's give that a good clean. Reassemble it. Oops. I can see there's an O-ring here, but I could also see the O-ring doesn't seem to fit properly. The O-ring seems very large. I don't know. I'm gonna have to find a different O-ring there. Look at that. It does not seem to fit right. But this is nice and loose. Let's give the IAC valve a better clean. Okay, you can see where I have a better fitting O-ring. Oops. Look at the size of those two O-rings. This is the one that came out of it. I don't know. And this is the one that, a replacement one from one of those bins. Okay, I got the screws back on the IAC valve. What I find interesting is, look, there seems to be some adjustment in the IAC valve. I don't know, that's really interesting. I don't know why that would be. You can see here with the new gasket, if that gasket doesn't fit properly, that could very well be where the leak is, where the vacuum leak is. But it's just weird that the IAC valve can move like that. Strange. Okay, the IAC valve is installed in the vehicle once again. You can see that the harness is plugged in. Okay, and let's take a close look at this while I cycle the ignition switch by connecting the positive battery to the battery cable. Okay. Okay, there's definitely some movement there now. I hope you guys see that. I can definitely see some movement there. Okay, time to reassemble everything and see if this works. Another day. Okay, got some new parts. New gaskets. I am missing one single bolt. That is a 3 bolts. That's 0.8 millimeter M5. All right. Okay, so I've got the throttle body and the IAC valve back onto the vehicle. The IAC valve wiring harness, the throttle position sensor harness, the MAF sensor plugged in, the air intake hoses plugged, connected. Vacuum hoses are, I still blocked off 2 vacuum hoses, no big deal. Let's start it up and let's warm it up and see what happens. So the problem was it idling at 1800 RPM when it's warm. Now that we service the IAC valve, let's see what happens. Okay. All right. We're at 54 degrees Celsius. And engine speeds are already better, 1300 RPM. That is a really healthy sounding engine. I'm just going to pause the video, I think. As the engine is heating up, now it's 65. You can see the RPM dropping is clearly going down. That's good. Okay, I lost my engine data. I don't know why. Anyways, so you can see here that it's idling properly now. It's been running the whole time. It's at operating temperature, and that's pretty good idle. It's pretty good. Operating temperature. But I want to show you that I want to show you that I use this my 5-point torque socket. I don't know what you call it. What I did was I loosened those bolts here. One there, and if you go back to the video, it looks like the IAC valve, the IAC motor actually has an adjustment. So I tried it just for fun. See what it does. Check this out. So rotate it one way. Rotate it one way, RPMs go up a little bit, and rotate it the other way, RPMs go down a bit. Isn't that interesting? So IAC valve, watch this, you rotate it one direction, RPMs go up, rotate it another direction, RPMs go down. Okay, let's try this again. So you see I'm about 750 RPM. And I turn on the AC, and the car cranks it up to maybe 950. Turn off the AC. AC is now off, and it drops back to 750. So that kind of proves that the only way the engine can control the RPM on a 2000 Celica GTS with an actual throttle cable is using the IAC, since there's no electronic throttle. So that kind of proves the IAC idle air control valve is actually working.